Thank you, Eddie. The current up-to-date view on issues within the Garda Síochána, I was just thinking, I think this is the fourth year in succession in which I've stood here to address the same issue. The same questions come round and round again. I feel a bit like Oisin in the Fenian cycle, the sort of I have the gift of eternal youth. I just keep on turning up and saying the same things over and over again. Time doesn't pass by. But it's a great pleasure to be here. It's always a great joy to be back in Donegal. And it is, of course, as always, an honour and a privilege to participate in the work and in the activity and in the liveliness that is the MacGill, the Patrick MacGill Summer School. As I say, it's the fourth successive year in which the school has focused on the issues of policing and on the Garda Síochána. And that indicates the difficulties that underline the processes of restructuring and reshaping the national police force. It's significant that we should be back year after year on the same topic with much the same questions. It's to the credit of those who organised the school and notably, of course, Joe Mulholland, that the importance of the issue is thus recognised and that it is kept firmly in the public agenda. Accountable, principled and effective policing is core to the welfare of any community. It has been held by distinguished political scientists that one of the most telling measures of the democratic health of a society is the conduct of its police service. So why is it that we have this recurring and seemingly intractable problem of how to operate a national police force that is modern, efficient and effective? It should be a fairly straightforward business in a small, fairly homogeneous state the size of Yorkshire in population terms, with a crime rate that remains quite low by international standards. Yet year after year, one issue or another seems to build up around the management and the operation of the Garda Síochána. We have one report or inquiry after another, more than 20 in a decade by my reckoning, perhaps starting with the Morris report that focused on policing issues here in Donegal, but which may well have applied to policing issues elsewhere around the state. And Morris was careful to point that out. We're only examining one division. We cannot say that these kind of problems don't exist elsewhere. They probably didn't in the same degree, but they may well have existed in some degree in some other areas. We'll never know. The Morris report was to change everything, but it didn't. Most of its key recommendations were strangled at birth, and most of the reforms that it promised in its wake came to nothing. Since we were here last, we've had the report of former High Court Judge Kevin O'Higgins. That in turn gave rise to another round of recrimination and accusation among various interest parties. Yet again, Judge O'Higgins identified the phenomenon of corporate cover-up, of circling of the wagons, of over-defensiveness among the Gardaí. On the positive side, since last we discussed policing here, we have had the advent of the Police Authority, chaired by Josephine Feely, who is here with us this afternoon. We have assurances from one commissioner after another, we have assurances from one minister after another, that there is to be, quote, root and branch reform. We've had enough roots and branches to forest half the country. New initiatives are promised that will aim to reconnect the police with the community, that will protect whistleblowers, that will ensure fairness and even-handedness, and that will enhance the force's effectiveness in protecting the community and confronting serious and organised crime. So, why is it that the Garda Síochána appears to be so impervious to reform? Why is it that one policing controversy after another breaks into the public domain? Why is it that time and again we seem to be confronted with issues of cover-up, evasiveness, excessive self-protectiveness and defensiveness? And why is it that when the Gardaí are required to examine some alleged shortcoming or malpractice, they almost invariably find that all is well? But when an outside examination takes place, whether it's by a judge or a senior counsel, the result is very often quite different. Sometimes the drip effect of unfavourable revelations has the effect of obscuring much of the excellent work that is done every day by the Garda Síochána. Every week The news media bring reports of guards placing themselves in the way of danger, confronting violent people, often armed. Each day and night, hundreds of guards are deployed on the streets and the towns and the villages to keep the peace, frequently being obliged to face provocation, taunting and abuse. Gardaí and specialised units do extraordinarily good work investigating serious crimes up to and including murder. Gardaí and security departments work constantly to contain the activities of would-be terrorists, people who would happily return this island to the conditions of strife and division that endured 40 years before the signing of the Belfast Agreement. I think it is important to say that notwithstanding the recurrence of controversies, there has been progress, and there continues to be progress towards the attainment of a police force that is effective and efficient, even-handed in its operation and accountable to community needs and priorities. That progress is gradual and incremental, but it is undeniable, even if it has taken place against a background of resistance, sulking and lack of cooperation among many sections of the Garda. It has taken more than a decade and a half to get this distance. A process of reform was initiated after the reports of the Morris Tribunal, but we do have GSOC, an independent oversight body. It's not perfect, but it does have full policing powers, responsible for processing and investigating complaints against the Gardaí. We have the Inspectorate, with the power to examine Garda practices and procedures, and to advise the Minister on how the best of force should be developed and managed. We have whistleblower legislation that, for all its shortcomings, has shown that it can be worked when courageous Gardaí like Sergeant Maurice McCabe step up to the plate. We now have an independent police authority to which the Commissioner is required to report in regard to policing functions, as distinct from security functions. These are not perfect. At key places, the legislation that supports these institutions brings final authority still back to the Department of Justice and to the Minister. The policing authority, for example, may recommend someone for appointment as Garda Commissioner, or indeed for dismissal from that post, but the final authority will rest with the politicians. It is regrettable, but true, that the Garda Síochána, from many among the senior establishment in the depot to the representative staff associations, have dragged their feet and utilised every loophole to resist these changes and to mitigate their effects. Change which is notionally and verbally accepted is too often subverted and obstructed. The letter of reform may be accepted because the legislators say it has to be so, but that does not mean that the spirit is accepted. Why is this? Why is it that a body of men and women who are, by and large, good people, imbued with decent values, patriotic, generally committed to their professional calling, why is it that they are so resistant to change and so fearful of scrutiny? It is a truism that the Garda Síochána is imbued with a singularly powerful culture. And it is a truism of management that culture will eat strategy for breakfast any morning. So what is this culture that we hear about in the Gardaí? What does it derive from? Why is it so powerful that it can resist the considerable pressure of public will and public opinion? I think it is necessary, in order to answer these questions, to look back at the history of the Gardaí. We are currently in what has been described as the decade of commemoration, marking the events that shaped Ireland between 1913 and 1923. The Garda Síochána celebrates its centenary in 1922, just 6 years away. It will no doubt be marked as it ought to be. The establishment of a new unarmed police service stands as one of the proud achievements of an independent Ireland. But 2022 will also mark the 200th anniversary of the foundation of the Irish Constabulary, later the Royal Irish Constabulary, the centralised, monolithic police force that held Ireland for the Crown for almost a full century. It is crucially important, if we understand Garda culture, to understand the extent of the continuity between the old police, the RIC and the Garda. That continuity has been rarely recognised for political reasons. But Michael Collins's brief to the organising committee that set up the Garda Síochána was to replicate the RIC in its organisation, in its discipline, in its command structures, and even in a system of divisions, districts and sub-districts, which, as Bob has told us here today, are still with us in their essence. Collins had targeted the RIC as the primary obstacle to the attainment of his political objectives, but he absolutely admired their courage, their discipline, their loyalty and their resolution. So when the Garda Síochána, or the Civic Guard as it was known, was first established, it was to be a mirror image of the old police, with a few liturgical changes: blue uniforms rather than bottle green, the same rank structure but different titles, identical disciplinary regime. They simply rewrote the RIC code in Irish. And Collins wanted every member to be armed with a Webley 45 revolver and a sabre. Every station was to be equipped with Lee Metford rifles and hand grenades. The concept of the Garda Síochána was only attained after Collins's death and after the infant force had mutinied and been disarmed at their camp in the Curragh. But most significantly of all, the new state established its police system on exactly the same lines of accountability as the previous police. British constabularies were controlled by county police authorities who appointed local police chief constables. But the RIC was a profoundly different model, centralised, controlled by an Inspector General, appointed by and reporting directly to government at Dublin Castle. The new state's police was to be similarly centralised, led by a commissioner, appointed by and answerable to a minister and into government. What Ireland got in the RIC and what we replicated in the new Irish police state was a police system much closer to the European gendarmerie model than to the constabulary system that operated in Britain. The RIC was a hugely successful institution. It was so successful that its model was replicated right across the empire in India, Africa, Canada, Hong Kong, and any number of distant colonies. Many senior RIC officers found successful and distinguished and lucrative careers heading these forces in the colonies. It was an armed force, paramilitary. Its members lived in barracks. The disciplinary code was draconian. Its rank and file were usually the sons of Roman Catholic small farmers, poorer tradesmen and small shopkeepers, while its officers were, for the most part, Protestant, the sons of lesser gentry or from military families, some of them independently wealthy. The brutal and indiscriminate nature of the disciplinary code and the sense of alienation among the rank and file within the RIC, I believe, passed over into the Garda Síochána. And what we are dealing now is the residue of that extraordinarily strict, disciplined and focused organisation. Extraordinarily strong bonds of loyalty and self-protection developed among the rank and file of the RIC, and that was replicated into the Garda Síochána. They watched out for each other, they protected each other, they lied for each other, they perjured for each other against the common enemy, the high authorities and the politicians who held absolute sway over their lot. Of the 14-member committee who shaped the new Civic Guard, or the Garda Síochána, 12 were former RIC members. Fewer than a score of RIC men actually joined the new States Police, but those who did held senior and key rank, and they shaped the new force in the image of the old. The strong linkages are shown in other ways. No fewer than 6 Garda commissioners, including the very first, Michael Staines, were the sons of RIC members. Historical circumstances cast the Garda Síochána in the same role as the RIC, as the state's primary security force, ensuring that the values held by the RIC rank and file were preserved down the decades. It is only a few short years since the Garda Síochána was in the front line against paramilitary subversion. 12 of its members died as a result of paramilitary violence. Government very consciously kept the force tightly under its wing. Ambitious Gardaí realised that the primary qualities required for a successful career were loyalty, solidarity, an unquestioning acceptance of authority and rank, and a commitment primarily to the security of the state. Nobody ever got to be Garda Commissioner by making a success out of community relations. These qualities, of course, were among the positives that enabled the force to hold the line and to do their duty by the state and by the community over the troubled and violent years that ended with the Belfast Agreement. They also allowed many of those in the political establishment to exploit the Garda Síochána as a source of favouritism and patronage. Appointment to the force, promotion and preferment, and even allocation to choice stations or functions were considered to be the prerogative of whoever held political power. So too was the fixing of proceedings, ranging from simple traffic offences right out to more serious offences such as we saw in Roscommon, for example, during the tenure of a particular Minister for Justice, now deceased. And this attitude prevailed across all political parties in Dáil Éireann. The Garda Síochána was their plaything, a source of patronage, a source of favouritism upon which to confer privileges and preferment among those who were perceived to be loyal. So when we talk about Garda culture, this is where it has emerged from. This is the background in which the Guards have struggled to try to come to terms with the requirements of a new, peaceful, community-oriented role. Garda culture has many virtues, but the key to the future development of the force, I would hold, is to adhere to and retain the good parts of that culture while shedding the secretiveness, the siege mentality and the sense of us being against all the rest that one encounters so much in the Guards. We're talking here about a set of values, as I said, which is built up over 200 years. Disestablishing that culture will take time, and progress has been made and continues to be made, but it has still got a way to go. One measure, I believe, which would be greatly of benefit to the force, and it has been touched upon indirectly by Jim and to some extent by Eddie in his overarching remarks, I believe would be to seed the middle and senior ranks of the force with men and women with experience in careers other than policing, as well as bringing people in from other police forces. We haven't been very good at bringing people in from other police forces. Yes, little known fact that under the policing agreement which was signed after the Belfast Agreement in 1998, provision was made for an exchange of members between the PSNI and the Garda Síochána. Well, you will search the senior ranks of either force to come across anybody who has transferred from one to the other. And the reasons for that are because the senior people in both forces have simply preferred to hold the ranks to themselves. And they've always found some reason for saying, oh no, that person from the PSNI is not suitable for our job. And similarly in the north, no, that person from the Garda Síochána is not suitable for our job. I believe the police management and leadership could be mastered relatively easily by men and women with executive experience in many other areas. It is common, as Jim has said, in other countries for senior public servants in non-police functions to spend a number of years within the policing system. I think the Garda Síochána, if it were to have one gift that could be given to it, would be to have people within its middle to senior ranks, and there are many excellent people within those ranks, but there aren't enough of them. I think it needs more people in those key ranks with the willingness to embrace change, the need to embrace openness, the confidence and the sense of purpose that is more readily found in the private sector, I believe, than in traditional policing. Such an initiative would be resisted tooth and nail by the Gardaí themselves, but the new policing authority has the powers, I believe, if it wishes, to make appointments other than outside of the traditional means of advancement that have been there. I believe this could help. I doubt very much if it will happen. The dual role of the Garda Síochána as the state's civil police and its primary security service means that it will always remain under the control of centralised government. And the Gardaí themselves will always play the security card when they come under pressure. In virtually every controversy within the force down the decades, the Gardaí have sought to invoke state security as a cover to conceal shortcomings or malpractices. It was at the root of the scandals here in Donegal. I think the only instance in which state security was not invoked was in relation to the fixing of penalty points, which defied even the ingenuity of some of those who had brought ducking and weaving to a fine art. So, will we be back here again next year, still talking about Garda reform? I don't know. That's up to you, Joe. The current Commissioner, Noreen O'Sullivan, and her team have produced a fine strategic plan with the noblest objectives for the future development of the force. But as far as I know, it has not been costed. I'm not sure it has an implementation pathway. It is aspirational. It may go the way of so many other reports and so many other documents of the type that Eddie has described, not just in the Garda Síochána, but across the public service. Frankly, I think many of the politicians are weary of trying to change things around the Guards. Increasingly, they accept, I think, that they have to live with a situation that is less than satisfactory. I think that is regrettable, but I think there is a weariness there that I detect when I talk to senior politicians of all parties. They just don't know what else they can do. By and large, the Guards do a good job. They are mostly honest, committed, even-handed and humane. Yes, many of them are inward-looking and self-protective. Yes, they try to cover their mistakes and pretend they haven't happened. And yes, they try to crush dissenters and whistleblowers. And sure, they look after their own. But in all of these things, in all of these values, in these vices and in these virtues, are they not simply a reflection of our wider society? Thank you.